Welcome to Healthcare du Jour, where we dish up and digest the latest in healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, sit back as we bring you insight, commentary, and discussion on trending topics to the table, all expertly served up by our host and his guests. Now here's your host, Matt Fisher.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining as we dive into the hottest topics in healthcare. I'm your host, Matt Fisher. On the menu today is Kent Dix, CEO and founder at Life365. Kent, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, Kent, what I always like to do before getting to the main part of the conversation is give my guests a chance to provide more of an introduction in terms of who they are and what they do. So, Kent, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. My name is Kent Dix, and I'm CEO of Life365, and this is my third company, second in healthcare. Our team that's together had a previous company called MedApps, which we sold to a Fortune 500 company that invented the first IoT of healthcare. So really trying to get into remote regions and trying to connect people seamlessly and wirelessly and cost effectively to try to feed the emerging electronic health records that are out there. So I would say that my background over the last 28 years in digital health has been to try to reach people into rural communities, to try to bring data into EMRs and EHRs, to bring it in now into analytic and AI and machine learning systems. Right from that, to try to really increase the access to care and try to ultimately reduce cost.
And so I know you just said this is your third company and the second one in healthcare. What got you into healthcare in the first place?
You know, it's interesting. My first company was more of a staffing company. So I came out of American Express, working for them as a programmer for the first 10 years. As technology was starting to go offshore, we needed to find a way to diversify ourselves. And our company, I left American Express and started a staffing company. Our company started getting into defense contracts and defense related staffing that's out there as well, secret and top secret clearance. I realized there was a big need for remotely, especially with drones coming up, with remotely connecting with soldiers, especially in remote areas of the world, and trying to get their physiological information. We quickly realized that there was a big need, especially in the US, in connecting people remotely to try to get access to who's going to be heading towards the emergency room. And so we started out with a very small contract with McKesson and their 2 million Medicaid patients that they had at the time, and just grew from there, right from that. So realized that smartphones were not invented back in 2006 timeframe when we started up, that we had to use Symbian off-the-shelf phones to try to talk to Bluetooth devices and send the data to the cloud. Realized also that since we're working with a Medicaid population, that there was the Medicaid population certainly wasn't going to have a $1,500 phone, right, and downloading apps at the time. But also, we made it a lot more convenient to create a dedicated IoT device that was very, very simple to be able to connect to scales and blood pressure through Bluetooth. And send the data directly into the back-end system without them having to download an app or do anything else with it as well. And it was incredibly effective to do that. So my first company started me thinking about this, with secret and top secret work with the government, and then started getting into the whole healthcare part of it.
Yeah, so kind of given your that breadth of experience, and I think you said you're still focusing on access to care and connecting in remote locations. What area or segment of healthcare are you focusing on in particular right now?
It is still, increasing access to healthcare. So we have a couple different examples that we're working on. Very, very fortunate that we've been part of the VA contract for remote patient monitoring for the next 8 to 10 years. We're a subcontractor on that. It's $1 billion contract that's split between 4 companies. But that $1 billion contract really only takes care of about 70,000 veterans today. The VA has about 18 million veterans, right, that are out there, 9 to 10 million that actually access the VA on a regular basis. And we know that veterans are getting older like the rest of us, like 10,000 people per day are turning 65, right? but also the VA is like everybody else too, where they're losing care coordinators. So there's a widening gap between the amount of people that are getting sicker, especially veterans that live in rural areas, and the amount of people that are available to take care of them. Technology is going to play an incredibly important role going forward. So the VA has already gone through and said we need to go from 70,000 veterans for that $1 billion up to 700,000 to 2 million. And we need to be able to start supplementing intelligently to our care coordinators, the patients or the veterans that need to have proactive care, and to be able to start doing what we call virtual first, which is using technology first and assessing first before it touches any type of human coordinator, right, that's out there. We need to do more with less.
Yeah, no, that seems to be kind of the word of the day in a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I know you just talked about, working with veterans in the VA. So, are there unique challenges or differences when you're working with the VA system?
Of course, right? I mean, the VA, from that perspective, again, veterans are getting older, right? From that as well, and there. It used to be when I started this, we were at like what was it, 20 years ago, 18 years ago, we were at $2.5 trillion in healthcare spend. Today, in the next couple of years, we're going to be getting up to 6 trillion. Right, it's almost tripled in that 20 or 22-year period from that. The number of people turning 65 has increased dramatically as well, and the number of people that are 65 and older that have one or more chronic diseases. When I started, it was like 60% of people over 65 had one or more chronic diseases. Today, it's up to 80% of people of people over 65 have one or more chronic diseases. So it is rapidly accelerating the amount of care that's going to be required of this really aging population that's going forward. And I have to be careful because I'm starting to hit close to that demographic, right, that's out there. Thankful enough that I'm healthy. But there's a lot of people that are not, and it's going to be an incredible drain on our system going forward. The other thing to take into consideration really quickly is with the advent of these platforms for healthcare and for consumer platforms as well, and with AI, consumers really want to have a choice of how they engage in their healthcare. And it's not always about, going in to see your doctor and going into the emergency room and waiting until you get sicker. Our veterans are particularly of interest to me. I testified in front of a Veterans Affairs subcommittee on healthcare in rural and highly rural areas. A lot of our veterans live in rural areas, right? From that, and you're seeing that part of the major retraction of healthcare resources is from the rural areas, right, as well. And so we're going to have to use technology and virtual care to try to get into those rural areas. Because as you and I know, if somebody is 2 to 3 hours away from their doctor, they're going to tend to exacerbate their disease state and make it a lot worse, right, from that as well. If we can start getting early indications that somebody's going on in their home early, we can start heading that off, preventively pretty early with it.
Yeah, and kind of with that focus on the rural areas, and seeing that as as you said, an area where it's harder to access care, and the care that's there is being pulled back. What are some of the unique challenges or technological barriers that you might encounter in being able to support individuals who are located in those spaces?
A lot of different things that have plagued our rural areas for quite a while, and the broadband initiatives have obviously been out there with USDA and trying to get everybody hooked up into their homes from that. And cellular connectivity has been a challenge, right, as well from that. But I'm pretty bullish on what's going on in the industry right now from a connectivity standpoint. We still have our deserts, right, that are out there where people are not, being connected. Like some of the clinics we're working with in rural Appalachia, right, in West Virginia, they do not have, access to the internet in a lot of places, and they also don't have access to cellular coverage, which makes it incredibly hard to try to extend care. But as we're starting to see rapid rapid deployment of technology, Starlink, I think, is going to play an incredible role, especially in rural areas when that gets fully deployed. I believe that AI is going to play an incredible, role going forward, especially in rural areas as well. Right from that, so we can start being connected through systems like Starlink and other USDA or broadband initiatives or cellular initiatives that are out there to be able to try to wipe out those deserts to try to get connected data from the individuals that is then fed into AI and AI and machine learning systems to start moving us from um, reactive care to proactive care. In fact, I call it the 5 Ps, and it's not completely my concept. I mean, there's Dr. Leroy Hood, and has actually coined these phrases for years. But the proactive side, I want to move to, proactive, predictive, preventative, and personalized and prioritized care. So why do I put prioritized in there as well? Is because when you're, a health system or you're a payer that's responsible for a patient, you want to be able to go through and say, I've got 100,000 people that I'm looking after, but I don't know which one's going to go to the emergency room next. I don't know which one needs my attention. Data coming from inside the home or around the patient will allow me to kind of go through and say, last time, especially with AI, last time I saw Kent's blood pressure get above 180 and his SpO2 or his oxygen below 85, and he gained 4% of his body weight in 2 days. Um, he was in admittance to the emergency room within 7 to 10 days. Right, those are the things that we want to start moving from ambulance rides and waiting till somebody gets sicker to now fast, proactive, fast response teams. Right, they can pick up the phone and call somebody, or using AI to nudge somebody, or to be able to send a fast response unit out to somebody saying, hey, Kent, I think it's time for me to come out and have a visit with you, or can I visit you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, instead of waiting for that emergency phone call and triaging it and doing an ambulance ride instead.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense because, as you said, if you can get in front of an issue, obviously you might not be able to stop it, but you can help reduce the severity of it and be able to respond in a more kind of timely and hopefully effective manner by understanding what's going on and seeing all those data points that are coming in.
You've got to actually look and see, where the risk is at and who's responsible. Like, why aren't we switching over to this, right away? Well, 90%, 95% of all hospitals are probably billing still fee for service. I mean, we haven't fully gone into value-based initiatives, right, that are out there. It's also been that a lot of the technology that's been put in place is very disparate. So if somebody, that's where I put the personalized side of it. If somebody's out there, you might have a system that's just working with, a company that's just working with diabetes, or a company that's just working with, heart failure, or a company that's just working with hypertension from that. But we've got to know from a platform and a systems perspective that Kent is one and the same person, right? And there's multiple things that are occurring with Kent, and we've got to overall know how Kent engages, right, in his own health, whether he likes this kind of engagement back and forth on a video, or whether he likes to see somebody face to face, or whether he likes to talk to somebody on the phone, or maybe it's good enough for an AI-driven chatbot to be talking to Kent, and he's totally comfortable with that, to try to nudge him, back into compliance. So one of the hardest things with health systems is trying to absorb all those different companies that are just disparate solutions and try to get them integrated and try to get them through security and through contract, and trying to make them personalized for that individual patient. But on the same token, they're integrated into the clinician's workflow, right? So one of the initiatives that we're working on, which I'm really super happy about, is working with Microsoft, who has access to thousands of health systems and providers that are out there, that are on Azure, Microsoft Azure. But Microsoft has created, it was Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, which we're part of, but also Microsoft Fabric. And what Microsoft Fabric is meant to do is meant to take in all this disparate data that a health system individually, those thousands would have to individually contract with, and be able to now contract it with Fabric, the Fabric layer of Microsoft once, and have one connection into Fabric, which they already do through their Azure system that's interfacing to their EMR and EHR and to the clinical workflow, and to be able to deploy a number of services like ours to be able to get into the home, get the data they need, go through the BI analytics from it as well through Microsoft, and then bring that back into the client's backend system, right, from it. So they're trying to take, and they are doing this, take all the friction points away from the healthcare clients, because that's been a major impediment to scaling.
Yeah, no, anytime there's friction and the need to kind of vet through different layers of organizational bureaucracy or just different functionality tools, as you're saying, makes it take that much longer. And
Yep.
for those of you just joining, I'm talking with Kent Dix from Life365. I'm talking a lot about remote connectivity with patients and the impact that can bring. And Kent, I'd like to kind of dig more into that friction point, because it's I'd be interested to know, beyond the friction with the system uptake, and it sounds like, as you said, you're working on ways to get around that. What have you seen from the patient utilization side of it? What makes it easier for the patient to utilize and makes it stickier with the patient when they're engaging with the solutions?
That's a really important question, because we work with one of our systems out of New York, White Plains Hospital. And initially, when we started going in to work with their hypertensive and their congestive heart failure patients, the thought was, to go in with an economical solution. Like, we would go in with with an app, right, on a phone, right, and I'm willing to embrace this kind of thinking. When I was doing this 20 years ago, I didn't think about this, because it was very unlikely that you're going to have a $1,500 smartphone sitting in, a 90-year-old's home that's on congestive heart failure. It could be an 80-year-old, and being able to take care of the population. But today, cell phones are more prevalent, right, from that. But there still is a major issue around, trying to get into a home, right, trying to get connected, trying to have the right technology and the right solution to be able to do that. Not everybody is comfortable with putting an app on their phone, right, and knowing how to install it, and then going through and trying to connect Bluetooth devices. One of the things that White Plains did is they aligned with Empress Ambulance, and said, "Well, we'll do hospital at home, and we'll have a paramedic show up, right, to the patient's home. We'll do the initial setup from that on their cell phone and Bluetooth and everything else." But that's expensive, right, to be able to do. And then what happens if the devices become impaired and everything else with it? So one of the things that we have moved to a fully automated system around cellular devices, right? So cellular embedded scales and cellular embedded blood pressure devices and cellular hubs that allow us to be able to come out of the kit and plug in a cellular hub, and it Bluetooth connects into scales and blood pressure. We found that it's just much easier to deploy. It's much easier to have the manufacturer ship it directly to the patient. It just basically comes out of the box. You put the batteries in, you take your first reading from it, and there's no messing around with having to pair devices and unpairing and all that kind of stuff. It automatically flows into your clinical backend system. So that is one thing that we really superly found. If you want to be able to scale to a larger population, especially populations that are costing money and also populations that are older, is to really move over to the cellular devices away from the apps, right, that are out there as well. And to be honest with you, Matt, it used to be when I started this that devices were costing us $300-$400 a piece. So we would deploy them with patients, and we'd have to get them back, clean them up, and put them out. Devices are a commodity nowadays, right? From that, you basically, with a congestive heart failure patient, you've got to think through the long term of this. You can't think of 30-day readmit. You got to understand that a congestive heart failure patient, you're probably going to own for 4 to 5 years, maybe on average. And because that's kind of the life span of a congestive heart failure patient, that they're going to probably go into the hospital or emergency room or have bouts if it's not controlled every 3 months or so. Right, you can control them, and then they're going to decomp. You can control them again; they're going to decomp. So, how can we go through and try to eliminate some of those visits, right, that are out that as well? So, you should be saying up front, "Listen, I'm with you. I'm connecting you. Here's your devices. They're going to be with you for your life, right, to be able to do that. And when you need them, we'd like you to be able to take your readings on a daily basis, whether you're going to the emergency room or not, because we want them to be connected to us, right, from that, and connected to our AI systems, so the AI systems can watch them and try to give them nudges back into compliance." That's one thing, and that looks like a value to the patient, like we're investing in the relationship. The other one is we have partners that allow us to use a couple of different things, conversational AI, right? To be able to start connecting with a patient and start engaging with them on a regular basis, to start asking questions, to be able to understand if they're getting worse or they're getting better or they're stabilized, right? From that, and engaging them in their process. Because as you know, we can ship out devices to somebody and they may be engaged for the first month or so, or two, and then they start maybe are not engaged. Going forward, how do you keep them engaged on a regular basis? We found our engagement companies are very good at doing that. The other one is we have a company that we work with called Canary Speech, which does voice biomarker. And so before even deploying any technology at all, can we start using on a conversation like that, the capturing of voice or the using of the camera to either do facial acquisition of data, right, from that, or voice biomarkers that will start giving me indications whether the patient's getting worse, normal, or better, right, from that perspective. And do that way upstream, shift left way upstream into a broader population that's not costing you a lot of dollars quite yet. But can we start using other technology that the AI only really sees? The clinician's not seeing, the patients are not seeing the data, but the AI sees and says, hey, maybe you need to start looking at Kent today, right? From that, it's not diagnosing, but it's going through and just giving an indication that maybe Kent's probably higher on your priority list to look at.
So if you're leveraging AI and kind of those capabilities in that form, what were some of the challenges that you saw in the development and utilization to make sure that it wasn't missing something or misinterpreting the information that was coming in?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we're not diagnosing, right? From that, we're looking at trends that are kind of coming in for you, and whether you compared to you and maybe the population as well, that you are perceived as normal. These are normal patterns for you, right? From that standpoint, so we're not deeply training the models that are out there, to try to do diagnosis, right? From that, we're trying to nudge you back into compliance. I will always say that, if the AI models that are emerging right now, that there's a lot of data out there. There's EMR data and EHR data. There's claims data. There's even genomic data. To me, that is training data, right, for AI. So, and when I give you the example before, going through and saying anytime Kent gets below, above 180 on his blood pressure, or his SpO2 is below 85, or he gains 4% of his body weight, he's going to head to the emergency room in 7 to 10 days. That's training data coming from the EMR and EHR, right? From that, maybe even claims data. What we do in that scenario is provide the near real-time observations, right, that are coming in from Kent, to make sure and say, okay, he's hitting these thresholds. We now need to move him higher, right, from this, to nudge him or to get somebody with him. And so it learns along the way, not only from the training data, but also from the observation data as well. And that's also, I'll say this really quickly, that's also the beauty and the benefit of us being integrated into Microsoft Fabric, because Microsoft Fabric has the ability, from a vast amount of data coming in from thousands of providers, to be able to train its platform. It's, again, not diagnosing. Microsoft doesn't want to be in the diagnosing business, but it's looking at patterns of data that need to be brought to somebody's attention right, from that perspective, and then the right clinicians can actually make the decisions once it's brought to their attention.
Yeah, no, it's kind of, I think as you're saying, it's really trying to make sense of all of this new information, all the new data sets that are being collected, and all the new possibilities for interaction. So, Kent, I hate to say it, but we're already almost out of time.
Wow.
So, I've got one final question for you, which is, what do you think is most likely to shake up healthcare in the coming year?
It's interesting. I kind of do this every once in a while. I know we're not in video, but I sit here and look at, the stock market, and I see a sea of red again today, right, from that. But if I scroll down to the bottom of my list, all the healthcare stocks are green, right? Healthcare stocks, and I did this with my last company too. I wrote out 2008, 9, and 10. Healthcare stocks are very much bellwethers, right? Going forward, you're seeing a lot of tech entrepreneurs moving into healthcare because the problem is just getting bigger by the day, right? From that. Where I also see is like what is going to change, what is now about this industry, what's going to push us forward, and it's going to be AI that pushes us forward. And I'm not saying that, from a hype perspective, it is. It's going to change how people want to engage in their healthcare. It's going to change models of healthcare, and it's going to do it dramatically, not as a nice to have, but a must have, right? From that, because we're getting sicker and we're getting more costlier. AI is going to drive change. It's going to drive a change from fee for service to more value-based initiatives that are out there to do that. It is not if it's going to happen, it's happening as we speak right now.
Yeah, no, it certainly, I think a statement that's being, or a sentiment that's being shared by many, and certainly one to keep an eye on. But as I said, believe it or not, we are already out of time. I want to thank my guest, Kent Dix, for a great conversation today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Matt. Great to be on the show.
And thank you to everyone listening. Keep the dialogue going and connect with me at #HCDEJURE. I'm Matt Fisher. Until next time.